All right, so this video is going to talk about the continued economic boom that is going on down in Tacoma, um, which is kind of what I had been talking about in the past of some of I guess they're speculative. At the time, it was speculative information, but it seems to be coming a little bit more true. And I kind of talked about one of these in the past a little bit more, but anyway, be sure to join the Discord, which is going to be down in the description box below. Tacoma is facing what Seattle saw not long ago, right? And what Bellevue is seeing. The big difference is that the caliber and size of buildings are not anywhere near the same, right? And we're not seeing the massive amount of development that Seattle once saw. However, if we're at Tacoma, this is different. I look at Tacoma as almost like Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., you can't have big, tall, high rise buildings because of the Capitol and all this other stuff. You can't have big, giant skyscrapers everywhere. So there's a reason why D.C. has height limits. And if you notice, D.C. is a very, very, very dense city. It is a small city, but very, very dense. And the surrounding suburbs just swallow DC, but it makes it it creates much more pressure. So as a result, traffic in DC always sucks. And they have their subway system, but yeah, it's just a densely packed city. So sometimes those mid-rise buildings may throw you off like, oh, because I say it all the time, another 8-story building or 5-story building. But density can really come from those buildings just as if you have several of them like you do in DC versus these big, tall 40-story buildings. And Tacoma is seeing that. In fact, a lot of the development of these apartments are along the light rail line that exists in Tacoma. Now, people get upset about light rail, but here's something I want folks, those who say, well, it's not light rail, it's a streetcar or it's a trolley. I'm someone who really and truly understands a lot about light rail train systems, streetcars, all of that, LRVs. Now, am I a specialist? No. But when what's it called, United, I don't know the name of the manufacturer, but they made the Portland streetcar. I received brochures from them, detailed pamphlets that talk about the streetcar in its entirety, all of the specs about it, everything. There was a point in time when I got all that information, and it was for a city project, not here in Tacoma, but for another city. So I got tons of information. Likewise, Brumbider, who else? Kyocera, or Kinkyocera, which is the company that is in Japan that builds the light rail trains that Seattle uses. There's a lot of different companies, right, that I actually was getting information from because of projects in the past. So I understand the classifications, what's considered to be light rail, what's considered to be heavy rail, because technically a streetcar is light rail. Now, what's classified as a light rail vehicle is different, because a light rail vehicle is what you see up in Seattle, it's what you see in Phoenix, Arizona, it's what you see some in Los Angeles, it's the MAX system in Portland. So I understand the difference. So I want to say that. The second thing is streetcar is what you see also in Portland, the Portland streetcar, Seattle streetcar. Kenosha, Wisconsin has an old school heritage streetcar system. It's what Cincinnati has. Actually, the streetcars you see in Cincinnati are what they're going to have here in Tacoma. It's going to be from the same company, which is Brookline. It's also the same one that DART uses in Dallas for their streetcar system. So I know quite a bit. I know a lot, right? San Diego, The reason why they called it a trolley back in the day was for people to be okay with it. They didn't want to tell people they're going to have trains running through the city, but if they said they were going to have a trolley, then there would have been buy-in. So sometimes semantics was used throughout time to get projects done, but also to kill projects, because the old mayor of Albuquerque, Richard Berry, destroyed the streetcar concept in that city by calling it a trolley. And so people were like, we don't want no trolley. And so as a result, it kind of helped people say, nah. So semantics are very important. That's something that I tell folks all the time. It's extremely important when you're coming to civic projects. It's very, very key. What's considered to be heavy rail are things like a subway system. Also, the big heavy commuter trains. You'll see the metro trains out of Chicago. That's a heavy rail system. They have both subway and heavy rail. You'll see Caltrain. That's a heavy rail system, right? It uses big heavy diesel trains or what have you, or subway, electrified subway trains as that. Sometimes DMUs, which are diesel multiple units. Those which you see in the Sprinter system, which is in San Diego, kind of San Diego, Oceanside. That's somewhat considered to be a light rail system, but it uses heavy rail tracks, right? Austin, they also have what's called Capital Metro, I believe, is their train, but that's also a DMU. Some classify that based on its weight as being more of a heavy rail, but also light rail. It's kind of that middle gray area. So my point is, I know all about that. The reason why Tacoma and Sound Transit calls the Line T or the Tacoma Link as a light rail is because big portions of it are in a private, dedicated system. It's not running in the streets all the time, 100%, like what you have in Cincinnati, what you have up in Seattle, or what you have in Portland. So they're able to call it a light rail line because it is a light rail. It's not a heavy rail. When you're talking about this, it's kind of confusing for some, because with a streetcar, I know this is getting deep in the weeds, the bed that they use when they build the system goes a certain depth. So when we're talking about streetcars, it's not as deep because the weight of that train is not as heavy. When we're talking about true light rail vehicles, they're heavier and there's more of them. So the track bed has to be much deeper and much more solid because of the weight. In fact, the track system is typically different as well. So in Portland, you don't see streetcars and the heavy light rail trains using the same tracks. You won't see the Max riding on the Portland streetcar line. It's too heavy. It will break the track system. However, the streetcars can use the Max train tracks, right? It can use those without a problem. However, if there is an electrical difference, because the light rail trains typically use a stronger, higher electrical capacity in the Canterbury lines, if that is set completely different than the streetcars, which a lot of times it is, then there's a problem. It won't work correctly without there being some sort of damage to the streetcar. So I wanted to put that out there for those who say, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I know what I'm talking about. The system here in Tacoma, it is a streetcar vehicle, but they call it a light rail because most of the system is going to be in its own private dedicated lanes. However, as it expands up into Hilltop, it is going to be in the street. So it's going to be waiting behind traffic. You can argue along Commerce Street, it does that as well. Commerce Street is kind of a transit mall, et cetera, right? But getting to this topic, spent 10 minutes on that. Where there is a light rail system or a light rail line, housing and apartments are going up like crazy here in Tacoma. It's becoming something that the city, if they really and truly want to get smart about housing, would build their own light rail system. So Pierce Transit should build its own streetcar line that connects to the existing line that we have. Now, they were going to build a possible rail system along Pack Avenue, but they said the cost would be so expensive. However, Pierce Transit doesn't own any sort of rail at all. They don't. It's strictly bus. But they're going to take BRT to run along Pacific Avenue and have other BRT lines. But when we're looking at 6th Avenue, one could argue that it makes, and there are people on 6th Avenue that says there should be a streetcar line there. That would make a lot of sense to run a streetcar line down 6th Avenue and connect that to the existing line. Now, you don't necessarily have to have tracks that, trains that run into each other or use the same stations. There'll be issues probably with Sound Transit as they are responsible for that line here in Tacoma. But you can have stations very close. And so they can be disconnected lines, but they can be very, very close. And so you have a train that really connects you all the way up and down that important corridor of 6th Avenue. So have a stop that's right there close by in the stadium area, and then people are able to walk to where they got to go to, and Pierce Transit actually has a start of a system. That would then allow 6th Avenue to start to grow upwards in terms of more apartments, right? There are other places. I think the city should, or Pierce Transit and the city should create some sort of a loop, if they can, to get people from the north part of downtown down into the south and what have you. Because if you look at the light rail system itself and the direction that it goes through downtown. There needs to be things that go up and get into more of the housing aspects of the city. Some people would say no, because there's going to be projects like these that will happen, but apparently developers love this because they can build bigger buildings or more densely packed buildings right along the line and not have to worry so much about parking, which is extremely expensive. So let's talk about this Tacoma Dome District. Now, right now, there's a project going on where they're building right in front of Freight House Square a building that will have a farmer's market. They're breaking ground for that. However, there's another building called Mont Bay Apartments. They had been in the news before that this was a project that was proposed. They had a drawing and everything. That drawing changed a couple of times, but it's going to be about 320 apartments. Okay, 320 apartments. Now, there used to be a spice company called Johnny's Fine Foods, right? That building's there. There's also a country western saloon, I think, right below that. It's a lounge. And so all of that would be knocked down for this $50 million project. And so that project is going up. And also another project that's going up is going to be out of Bellevue. It's a company called Isola Homes. And they're building an 8-story, 152-unit building that is going to be developed as well. And that's going to be right there close to the Brewery District. And we'll talk more about that, right? But let's go back to the Dome, right? This is still in its early phases. And one of the companies that's designing this is called Studio 19, the architectural firm. They are also designing a few other projects here. One, the Trent development, which is that big 2-block apartment structure that I talked about. They designed that. There's others. Excuse me. But this particular project is extremely important. And so it covers a pretty big swath because it covers from East C Street to East D Street along 25th Avenue. 25th Avenue runs right here, which is also where Freight House Square is. Our pottery studio business is 25th Avenue. So it runs along there, but it's along C and D Street. This is a very densely packed area to begin with, but it doesn't have a lot of housing. This changes that. Now you have 2 projects, 2 bookends, if you will, right there along the light rail line that will have apartments. This is going to be 300, what did I say? 320 units. The other project, which sits right there in front of Freight House Square, which also has a transit stop, is going to have over 100 and something. So we're talking 500 units roughly. between these two transit stops. There's the transit stop right there that's called the Tacoma Dome, and then you have the East 25th Street transit stop. Those two are right there, and these two projects are going to be along those two light rail stations, right? So they talk about the Tacoma Tracks, which is the apartment building that's going up right there in front of Freight House Square. It's going to have 115 units. So when you look at these two projects in that area, it is adding a tremendous amount of volume in a kind of small spot, right? And so now they're located in the Dome District, which is really the transit hub of this entire region, the South Sound region, right? Now, this building is not saying if they're going to have any sort of affordable housing. Trax is going to have a small amount of affordable housing. This isn't saying that at all. It's not mentioning that whatsoever. It could be. But developers are coming here because they're saying by 2040, Tacoma is going to actually grow by 45,000 new households. Not people, households. 45,000. And so they're coming here because of that. They have to accommodate for it. They're talking about the fact that because of the light rail system that we have, it connects key places. This was a very good idea that Sound Transit did back in the 90s when they built this, was all of the transit might is right there in the Dome District, which is a blank canvas. You can do a lot of building in the Dome District. Then it goes right into downtown, right by the university. They talk about this. It then goes into the core of downtown, which is where most of the big offices in the city or in the county are right there. Then it's now going to expand up into some of these other neighborhoods and go right into Hilltop, which is a very historic district. But the spine of this along MLK is our hospital campus. It's a mile of hospitals, which has hundreds of employees. It is a smart strategy by Sound Transit in terms of what they're doing for that line. What it does for Tacoma is it accelerates the amount of construction because there are so many projects that are going up right now that this line is going to have to feed, right? It's going to have to feed. So when we're looking at this particular development, like I said, it's going to be about $50 million to actually build it. It's going to stretch pretty far. They're going to have to tear down everything that's going to be there. But when you add up these two projects, the Tracks, which is 115 units, $40 million, this is $90 million being spent in basically a half a block. That's more than a half a block, half a mile, okay? Less than that. In less than a half a mile, that's what you're seeing, right? There are developments going on all throughout the city, don't get me wrong. Right there in where the old Kmart was, they're actually tearing that up and they're going to put in 17 three-story apartment buildings all throughout that, adding hundreds of apartments there, right? That's over there, I think, off of 6th Avenue. And it's also, they're focusing too a lot in right there as you get off the Narrows Bridge. That area, that swath of area is becoming a focus point for developers. It's kind of like this new hot spot in the city, right? So when you look at all of this, and this is prior to the city approving any sort of TIF financing, tax incremental financing. They haven't even voted on that yet. And you're seeing this type of development. Imagine whenever if they do approve it and they actually do it, what's going to happen to all of the development here? It's going to be insane. So they talk about this. So now if you look at just a smattering of some of the projects, Montlake Terrace, and this isn't all of them. There's a few that have been listed and they own the land. They just haven't actually dug into the soil yet or filed permits. But when you look at this, you have Tracks, you have Montlake Terrace, you have the Town Center, and you have the Rook, which is built by Trent Development, which is that big, huge block section. All of those are really before you get into the core of downtown. They stretch from the Dome District right through the Brewery District, and that's it. Those Dome, Brewery, downtown, which downtown and Brewery are kind of the same. But if you look at that L-shaped section, you're talking easily 1,000 apartments. Easily. Because with the town center itself, you're having over 500 some apartments that are going to be developed there. When you talk about the Rook, I forget how many that they're going to have within 358 units. Then when you add in these other close to 500 apartments, just those 4 projects alone is 1,000 apartments that are going to be put into the city. And there's others. There are many, many others. They're saying that essentially this is the time for developers to take a look. And many of these are out of Seattle. Many of these developers that you see are out of Seattle, and they're saying this is the place that we want to focus our energy. So it is getting pretty hot down here. It is gritty city chic, because a lot of people are attracted to that. They see Tacoma as this gritty city. Well, we're talking about people. That is kind of cool to go to. It's kind of hip. They're saying basically it is like Portland and Seattle in a very small, tiny, tiny bite. And that's what you get when you look at Tacoma. It is a coastal city similar to what you see in Seattle, but it's got that weird quirkiness of Portland. It is such a unique place. People visit and they like it when they come here. Developers visit and they like it when they come here. So you have that project, and then you have that condo project, which is going to go up right along the waterfront. It's a triangular plot of land. A developer's building, I think it's a 7-story building, all condos, about 31 condos. Those condos start at $1 million. So that project is also moving forward. It will have a small amount of office in there, not even worth mentioning. But we're talking a building going up that's going to look like a boat, a ship, right? That's the whole concept of it. It's going to look like a ship. And that project's going up. And the developer says that they feel like this is the time for Tacoma. And they feel like there's a lot of executives that are wanting to locate here and be able to travel wherever they need to, because they don't have to go every single day. They believe that there's going to be a lot of remote working in the future, and that Tacoma offers a lot of amenities that developers are wanting. So they're building that project as well. This is a completely different project. So there's a lot of development going on, and I haven't even touched on 50%. This is just a small portion of what's actually out there. There's so many projects going on right now that it would take me over 3 or 4 hours to talk about every single project that's actually in the design phase, planning phase, or breaking ground. So stay tuned. It's going to get pretty interesting in the next coming days. One of the things that does concern me is the lack of a grocery store. Someone said there's one over in Stadium. I get that. But when you're talking about people who live in the Dome District, or you're talking about people who live right there in the Brewery District, having a grocery store that's a little bit kind of off the beaten path is a problem. So having one in the core of downtown like we did have is very important. It's not that we can't support it, because we can. If Albuquerque can support a grocery store downtown, and you don't have hardly anybody living down there compared to here, there's no reason why Tacoma can't. And even Olympia has a grocery store downtown. We have a few little markets, but a full-fledged grocery store needs to be down there, because as you can see, with these 4 projects, that's 1,000 units. Hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to join the Discord down in the description box below. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, I will see you. Take care.